We're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to talk a little bit about keeping your transactions together in this market. I do not like deals that fall apart in a normal market. I always believe there's a way to keep deals together if we've done our job. But in this market where anything and everything can upset the apple cart, even when you think things are going well, it's ultimately our job to help control, to help educate, to help re-educate all of the parties in keeping this deal together. And sometimes we might be the only agent in a transaction, and sometimes we're going to be working with another agent in the transactions, but they are either incapable or unwilling to go the extra mile to keep the deal together. So what I need you to understand is sometimes you're going to end up having to pull more than your weight in these transactions, and I would encourage you to do so. At the end of the day, it's about a paycheck for you and having satisfied clients. But for the clients and our customers right now, it's for helping them either get into their real estate dream or get out of their real estate dream or move on to a new real estate dream. So our job right now is more important than it's ever been. FSBOs obviously don't have the education and the background and the transactional experience that you guys have, plus the support of your brokers in helping put these deals together. So for sale by owners would be a great person to hit on in this market right now. Don't know if there's a lot of them. You guys can probably let me know that, but they need our help more than ever. You'll notice in the lower left corner, quarantine day 20 today. After our governor instituted the stay at home, we are on quarantine day 20. So I don't know if many of you are going nuts. I am. I miss you all. Miss being in the office and walking up and down the halls and checking in with you guys, see how everything's going in your life and in your transactions. So today is day 20, which when you think about it, isn't too bad, because if many of you can remember, Tom Hanks started in Castaway, and he and Wilson actually practiced social distancing for 4 years. And if that wasn't bad enough, our friend over in North Korea, he's been practicing social distancing for 36 years. So we've got a ways to go before we get there, hopefully, but hopefully we'll be out of this in a month. We are in a new market right now. How we sold homes 2 months ago, 6 months ago, 1 month ago isn't how we sell homes now or in the near foreseeable future. What you have to remember is, even though we might be coming out of this in a couple of weeks and the governor will lift the stay and we'll be able to go back to business as normal, business will not be normal. There will be many of our clients, customers, potential clients that will be operating very cautiously moving forward. They will want to practice not only safe social distancing, but really safe social distancing by maybe working in the market that we're in now, which is less showings, less viewings, more pictures, virtual tours, finding out things without being face-to-face with people. So we're not just talking about today and this week, how we're doing business, but probably in the near future as well. Right now, everybody is more cautious. You as agents, some agents have chosen to take themselves out of this market because they either aren't comfortable operating in this market, they're not comfortable that everybody else is going to be safely operating in this market, or they might have some high risk concerns either of their own health issues or those in their immediate families where they're going to be operating more cautiously right now. Everyone needs more information right now in helping put these transactions together. So as agents, you're going to need to have more information when you're pulling together a market analysis. Some of you are helping sellers by performing a market analysis, and maybe at this point in time you haven't even gotten into the market. The sellers maybe provided you with some information, sent you some pictures. So it's important that you gather all of the information that you can: county tax records, city records, permits, anything that the seller can give you, past MLS sheets, right? RPR, Realtor Property Resource records, anything to help that you can gather to help create a good market analysis for that seller, maybe sight unseen or limited sight sighting of that property. Sellers need more information from you. If you're the listing agent, the sellers are really leaning on you in this marketplace and providing them with, what we're trying to give them is ease of mind, openness, honesty, and making sure that they're aware of the process all along the way. So sellers are going to want to see the contracts that you have. Normally, if you sat down with a seller with your contracts, you were face-to-face and you were presenting the agency, the listing agreements, net sheets, seller's disclosures, purchase agreements face-to-face and explaining everything to them. Many times you're doing that remotely. You have an obligation, both under state statute and code of ethics, as well as best business practice, to make sure that everybody that you give a contract to, you not only give them a copy of that contract, but you explain to them everything that's in that contract. You can't send a contract to somebody and say, hey, read it over. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, sign it, send it back. You have an obligation to actually explain it to them. I don't think you have an obligation to necessarily explain it to them line by line or to read through it line by line with them, but you certainly send it to them. Tell them that I'll be contacting you at 4:30 today. We'll need about a half an hour or an hour to go over the contracts. Does that work for you? So make sure you're doing that. Buyers also have a greater need for information right now. Buyers are at a little bit of a disadvantage. Something that they're dreaming of paying $250 or $350 or $550 or $950 for, they're going to have limited access to those properties. I think it would be helpful for any properties that you know that your buyer is focusing on. So whether that's a request for a second appointment on a property, or you know that this is a very particular client. We've talked about lots of homes on the phone, but they only want to see 3, that you provide them with everything that you can before you get to those 3 properties. So make sure you send them the full MLS sheet, any supplements, any seller's disclosures, plat maps, tax information, anything that you can, so that when they get to that property and they might have an abbreviated visit, that they know while they're there, they've already seen the seller's disclosure statement. Seller said he had water in the southeast corner of the basement. While we're there, let's focus in on that particular issue to see if that's something that I can live with, or something that can be fixed, or something that's going to scare me away from this property. Our friends, the inspectors, the appraisers, are going to have limited access to the property. Inspectors right now basically are asking that they be the only party at the inspection. So they're asking that the sellers vacate, which might be difficult when you think about it. We're all in the same boat, right? If a house is occupied and the sellers are working from home, and now we've asked for, and they've got the kids at home, and now you're asking a seller to be gone for 4 hours. Well, in a normal market, they're not going to be home to begin with, right? Kids are in school, parents are at work. And now we're asking them to vacate the only safe space that they have right now and go away for 3 or 4 hours. So we need to keep in mind that our inspectors might be able to work faster, but they might have limited time in a property. So getting everything to them up front as a listing agent and as a buyer's agent is really important. So as either a listing or a buyer's agent, if you've got access to permits on the property, the seller's disclosure, the previous seller's disclosure, city code compliance, whatever it is, make sure that the inspectors have that before they go out and visit the property. Same way for the appraisers. Appraisers right now, in many cases, do not have to physically inspect the interior of the property, which might speed up their visit to the property, but it certainly doesn't mean that they need less information. They probably need more. So making sure you have good pictures for the appraiser and all of those same things that we talked about before, supplements, permits, whatever it might be. Closers, closers in many cases are working from their offices or remotely. They might not have easy access to everything that they would in a normal market and being in the office. So make sure you're getting good, complete information to your closers, the whole file, all of the contact information, the other agent's contact information, and closing information, loan officers. The insurance agent's one of the last parties in the transaction. Generally, the buyer's got to contact them, reach out to them, and provide them with information. So if you're getting any requests from insurance agents, make sure to handle those timely. Everybody is in this together. One of the greatest things that I can see in this market with a bunch of uncertainties is to preach flexibility with all of the parties, starting on day one. Don't wait till you're in a situation to explain the situation. Talk to your buyers, talk to your sellers, and say, in a normal market, we'd be finding a house, writing an offer, picking occupancy 45 days from now. And as long as the seller said, okay, everybody puts that date in concrete. Well, right now, there's a lot of things that are beyond our control and things that we might not be able to foresee as a potential issue. And what I need to let you know, Mr. Seller or Mr. Buyer or Mr. Other Agent, is the greatest thing that we can have going for us right now is communication, constant communication. And I'm going to try to update you on a daily, weekly, every third day, whatever it might be. Set that expectation up front, right? I'm going to call you on Monday. I'm going to call you on Thursday and give you updates, and then follow through on that. Cooperation, Mr. Seller, Mr. Buyer, Mr. Other Agent. The biggest thing, one of the other things that we need other than good communication and flexibility is cooperation. I'm going to use my best efforts to help in a timely fashion, solve some problems, get some information, get you documentation, prepare new documentation. So making sure that you as agents are working together. And I know sometimes we've worked with some agents that we hope to never see again in our real estate career. The problem is today, you and they are married in this transaction. As a listing agent, I don't get to pick out who the buyer picks to represent them. And as a buyer's agent, I don't get to pick who has the listing on that property. So even though you might be working with somebody that's a difficult agent and experienced, or a difficult agent and brand new, make sure you're going the extra effort to communicate with them and cooperate with them, and in some cases, even doing the extra work. In this market, I always say, well, in any market, I always say, be the agent that volunteers to get something done. If you need a new document created to extend a closing date or for the inspection, clearing, or whatever the heck it might be the agent that volunteers. I mean, hey, Lynn, I know you're probably busy. We're going to be changing the closing date. Sounds like everybody's good moving it from the 20th to the 28th. I'll go ahead and prepare that, get my client to sign it, and get it over to you, Lynn. Is that okay? Once I've done that, that's probably 90% of the work, because now all Lynn, the lazy agent, needs to do, sorry to pick on you, Lynn, is to send it on to her clients for signature. So be the agent that's always willing to volunteer to prepare that document, get your client's signature, and getting it over to the other party. You're going to have to use some extra effort in this marketplace. On the one hand, we're working from home. On the other hand, we might not have everything at home that we need to have access to get a job done. And you might need to put in some extra time, unfortunately. And it seems like we're working harder on every transaction right now, but extra effort into making sure that this transaction, is successful at the end of the day. Pre-communicate everything. So don't wait for the appraisal appointment call to talk to your seller about the appraisal. Once the seller's accepted the PA, say, hey, Mr. Seller, just a couple of things in the next couple of days. We've got the inspector coming out. My understanding, he's going to do a radon test too, which means he needs to be at the property probably at least twice, once to place the radon, once to come back and pick it up, and he'll probably do the inspection on one of those two ends. And then after that, Mr. Seller, the next person we're likely to see in here is the appraiser. He's going to want to be at the property probably an hour. He's going to be inside, outside. He's going to be taking pictures. And then don't forget about the buyer's final walkthrough. So pre-communicate everything. And now once the inspection's done and that's passed, hey, Mr. Seller, don't forget, I told you the next person is coming in is the appraiser, right? And talk to them about that process. So don't wait until you get an appointment request. Let your parties know. Same way on the buyer's end. Hey, Mr. Buyer, I've been in communication with the listing agent. He let me know the appraiser's going out there tomorrow. We got him some comps. We provide him with some information. It's sitting there at the house for him, or we've emailed it to him. And again, Mr. Buyer, remember the appraiser might not get into the property. So let everybody know what's going on in the transaction. In this market, nobody wants to be surprised by anything. In past markets, we've seen that some transactions are just going to blow up and there's nothing we can do, right? The parties made a decision. I got cold feet as a buyer and I just want out of this deal. And sometimes that happens the day after the offer gets accepted, or sometimes it happens the day before closing. Nobody likes being surprised. And so our goal is to make sure there aren't any surprises. And in some cases, you're going to have to anticipate things. And in some cases, you're going to have to do a super job of reinforcing what the client's decision was, whether it be to buy a property or to sell a property in this marketplace. We're going to want to make sure that we take any potential bumps out of the road for them. You guys should be able to sense something coming up and get it addressed ahead of the time. Let them know that, hey, the appraiser was there. He called me. He wanted some additional comps. Sounds like he's struggling to get to our price. I'm pulling some comps. I'm sending it to him. Hopefully we'll get to our value. So, try to anticipate any potential issues that you want or that you have. This is your job. You need to be the better agent in this market. Your client picked you, buyer or seller, they picked you. Surprise them with your counsel, with your service. And the hardest thing in this market, probably attitude. Even in a good market, buyers and sellers, the closer we get to closing, sometimes we see the stress that puts on people. In this market, it is probably going to be multiplied, right? Because of the unknowns that are going on, not only in the real estate transaction, but probably in the rest of their life, right? I mean, is the governor going to lift the stay? Are the kids going to go back to school? Do I get to go back and work at work instead of at home, right? How's mom doing? How's the kids doing? Soccer's starting up now. I've got to add that to the schedule. So it's important that you keep a great attitude, a great can-do attitude with your clients, and help them through this transaction, as well as the other agent. If the other agent's difficult, you don't know what's going on in their life. So this might be an off transaction for this particular agent. They're just at a spot in their life that they're not in a great spot. You can help lift them up too by maintaining a good attitude. Do more than is expected of you, and do it sooner than later. Don't wait for somebody to drag something out of you. Sit down with your checklist, your marketing plan, whatever it might be, and make sure you're doing more than what's expected, and make sure you're doing it sooner. Everybody will appreciate it, right? Nobody ever likes it when you say to them, hey, I think I should have told you this before, or I think I should have done this sooner, right? So try to anticipate things and get those done sooner. Communicate. The $750 dollar phone that you have actually makes phone calls. Your clients do not want texts from you right now. I mean, do I appreciate texts from my kids or a phone call? To be honest with you, sometimes a text is okay. Hey, how are you guys doing? We're doing great. Okay. But with your clients, buyers or sellers, they've got enough stress going on in their life without a home sale or home purchase. They need to hear your voice on the other end. You need to ask them if they have any concerns or anything that they need more information on, or anything you can help them with. Try to remove stress from their life rather than letting them fester in it. So use your phone, check in with them 2 to 3 times a week for anybody that you've got right now in a pending transaction, and make sure you're reaching out to the other agent as well, and the loan officer and the closers, just to make sure everything's going smoothly. Confirm everything in emails, right? When you and I hang up the phone, I'm going to forget you told me on Tuesday the appraiser's coming, and on Thursday the radon's being picked up. So send an email. Greg, it was nice talking to you. Don't forget, Tuesday inspector's coming, Wednesday appraiser, Thursday radon's being picked up, whatever it can. And make sure you're copying. If you've got more than one seller, make sure you're copying both sellers. We've seen some communication issues right now. With the stress going on in people's lives, right? A husband might say, well, I'm not going to tell my wife that because it might upset her, and so I'll just keep it to me. And of course, she gets more upset when she finds out later on that he didn't tell her something. So make sure you're confirming everything in an email to both your clients, and let them know that this is how we're going to communicate together to keep this transaction going. Schedule everything. Let your clients know in advance of what's being done, when it's being done, and when completed lists need to be taken care of. You keep reinforcing their decisions. They are going to be going through a lot of self-doubt. They'll be talking to family, and the family say, "How you doing?" And they go, "Oh, we just bought a house." And the family is going to go, "Are you nuts?" And then they're going to rethink what they just did. So you need to keep reinforcing what they've chosen to do, to buy, to sell in this marketplace. Be positive. Remind them of, hey, you guys looked at 900 homes online. You favorited 65. You focused in on 7. We looked at all 7 of those, and you picked this one out. It's been a 6 months process for you. We've got great interest rates. You got a great house. You got a great price. Whatever it might be, keep reinforcing whatever their decisions were to purchase or to sell. We will have some sellers that will want to get out of a purchase agreement. We already have, where they said, "I understand I'm in a purchase agreement, but I'm thinking I don't want to sell now." And so we got to remind them that they're in a legally binding contract. We're not going to push them into anything. We're going to recommend they get legal counsel, but you're reinforcing them of their decisions is going to go a long way in keeping these transactions together. Know your PA terms. Make sure that the purchase agreements that you're signing right now are clean. I mean, it was important to have clean, well-written, buttoned-up purchase agreements before in a great market where people wanted to willingly move. In this, where people are going to be a little skeptical or a little queasy or a little uncertain of their decisions, we want to make sure that the contracts have clear terms for them, no matter what side of the transaction they're on. So some agents we've experienced in recent marketplaces where an agent's got a purchase agreement, he's got 9 necessary contract terms and they're all blank. Don't have your seller sign those contracts. Make sure they get cleaned up. And if that means you have to rewrite the offer for the other agent instead of countering 15 things, then do that. Reach out to that agent and say, "Hey, Greg presented your offer to the seller. They noted a couple of things were missing. So what I've done is I've rewritten the offer with my seller's terms, of course, and I've sent that back to you for you to get the buyer's signatures on it first. And then when you've got that done, send it back to me and I'll get my seller's signatures on it." So make sure that you've got good, solid contracts moving forward. Keep the transaction moving along. Make sure you're doing your part. If you're the buyer's agent, let the listing agent know, "Hey, thanks for sending over that finalized PA yesterday. Talk to the buyer. They're sending earnest money tomorrow via trust funds." If you're the listing agent, keep asking about the earnest money. Once you send over a completed PA, "Hey, Greg, here's a PA for your buyer. When can we expect the earnest money? You got 2 business days. When's it coming? How's it coming?" I would guess most people are using trust funds right now. That number should have gone up, and it's the best way for agents to make sure the earnest money is getting delivered. But ask. Don't wait till day 3 or day 4 or day 5 and say, "Hey, where's the earnest money?" Make sure you're on top of it ahead. Problems will come up. Hopefully you're able to anticipate what those are, and make sure you're reaching out to your broker. We're here for you. But we want to minimize the problems and work our way through that. The biggest thing is focusing on solutions, right? We can all complain about a problem. We can kick the problem around. We can be mad about the problem. Your job with your clients and the other agents in the transaction is focusing on solutions, right? "Hey, we're going to have a delayed closing." Okay, why? Okay, is there anything we can do about that, right? Rent back or whatever it might be. Again, there's going to be a lot of surprises coming up in the next couple of weeks, in the next couple of months, whether we get a stay removed and we can all go back to work. But there's going to be things that are going to happen. We're going to have buyers that are waiting to go back to work before the lender will qualify them again, or buyers that have to wait from going back to work from part-time to full-time. So focus on what those solutions are. The good news is, Mr. Seller, we still have a binding purchase agreement. We've got a buyer that wants to buy your house. Bad news is we might need to wait a month while they get their employment back in place and the lender can re-verify that their source of income or the amount of income. You also need to see through the BS. There are some buyers, there are some sellers, and there are some other agents that are going to be throwing some things at you that are not either accurate or 100% accurate. They're going to get cute in some explanations. You need to make sure that you have a good answer to any concerns, any questions, or any issues in every one of your transactions. So if you're not getting clear information from me, the other agent on the transaction, then reach out to the loan officer, reach out to the closer, and make sure that you're aware of what those issues are so we can work through them. Some people are going to be in denial, right? In a normal market, people have been in denial, deny that they've got issues, and they think that if I ignore them long enough, they'll go away or they'll minimize themselves and then I can solve them. My advice is to search out for those issues and then work to get a solution so that you're not stumped or it doesn't create a roadblock down the road. Me, as your broker, and Lynn and Steve and Cindy are here to support you. Lean on us. That's our job. We want to make sure that every one of your transactions is successful and that your clients, customers are happy in those transactions. Call sooner than later. Again, I'd rather get you out of, or keep you out of trouble than get you out of trouble. And together we can brainstorm, and sometimes we might need to pull in your client and do a conversation to come up with some solutions to some problems. When you do reach out to us, make sure you know what your contract terms are. I know when I get calls from agents, it's okay. Are you on the buy side or the sell side? Or is it dual agency, right? How is this being financed? What financing terms did the buyer pick, box 1 or box 2? Are there any contingencies? So when you call us, we don't always have access to pull up your file, so make sure you know what those contract terms are when you're reaching out for help. The COVID Addendum Amendment. A couple of things that I want to address. This is a new form. It isn't perfect. It's better than nothing, right? And it was better than what a couple of brokerages had thrown together to try to address COVID-related issues in our transactions. A couple of things to keep in mind. If you've read through it, it does, in the first couple of lines, it says, buyers and sellers agree to work in good faith, right? Why do we need that information? Because this is like our agreement now at the time of the offer that should some glitch come up, man, I sure would like to put this deal together as your buyer, and hopefully you would like to put the deal together with me as the seller. And we understand there might be some bumps that we need to work forward. And while we're not hoping for any, I intend to try to work my way through these, and hopefully you are as well. So I think it's great that the document is available. I would recommend that it's in every one of your transactions, new construction, lots. It doesn't investment properties, because we don't know what COVID-related issues might do to delay the transaction. But it's just the party's agreement up front that I've got some flexibility here, and I understand the glitches might come up. It does specifically address unforeseen events, any delays, inspections, appraisals, the ability to close, to fund, to do a final walkthrough, for the seller to give possession on the date of closing. There might be delays or cancellations or closings. Now, that doesn't mean the closer closings. This means that the city might shut down the county government, and you can't get updated tax or property records, or you can't clear a lien on a property. So all of those things are out of our control. And the parties understand that any of those unforeseen and other unforeseen events might cause a delay in our closing going forward. And it also addresses specific events. So a quarantine, I could be quarantined, you could be quarantined. Doesn't matter much really if we're the real estate agent in the transaction, but it certainly makes a difference if you're the buyer or the seller. Hospitalization. There's some people that have gone into the hospital and haven't been able to legally function because of whatever medications that they're on. So keep in mind that a hospitalization could also be one of the events that causes a delay. access of services of others in the transaction, and any other unforeseen impediments to the transaction. So that's what the COVID addendum specifically addresses. And I know we've had some resistance in some cases for an agent to have it in a transaction. Remember, at the end of the day, it's not my decision, right? I present this to my client, Mr. Buyer, here is a new form. It's a COVID addendum at this point in time. We're writing up the purchase agreement. And what it does is, and you know, good faith, unforeseen events, and events that could delay this transaction from moving forward. Would you like to have this into your transaction? Now, a first-time buyer moving out of an apartment might go, nah, I don't need it, I'm good. Well, there's probably nothing on his end that might delay it. But for a seller that's also purchasing another house, and that seller's purchasing another house, and that seller's purchasing another house, it might be in that seller's best interest to have this COVID addendum as part of the purchase agreement. Some agents have not read the form. Some agents don't understand the form. Some agents don't like the form, but at the end of the day, it's not my decision. I need to present this to my clients as a way to make sure that if we don't close on May 30th, which is the date in the purchase agreement, due to some sort of COVID-related delay, that we've got a pre-agreement that that delay was agreed upon and the parties agreed to a 15-day timeout period. So don't let another agent get in the way of that. And I know there are some that are fighting the addendum, but I don't see a negative to it because we don't know which transactions might have an issue in this. And then the last point on this slide, the COVID addendum is not a reason to have a delay just because you have this agreement in place. I'll give you an example. We've got one going on right now. Buyer is an investor buying a rental property. And he went to his attorney to have the contract reviewed. And the attorney says, you might not want to close on this right away because there's nothing in here that guarantees that the tenants that are in the property now will continue to pay rent. And I'm going, well, there's never a guarantee that any tenant is ever going to be, right? A tenant with an 850 credit score and the best job in the world is no guarantee that that guy's going to continue to pay rent. So we've had a couple of investors that said, yeah, we'd like to push off closing, 30, 60, 90 days until this all settles down. Now that sounds fine if you're the buyer, but for the seller who has planned, right, to get rid of this asset and have a closing and either move on with the money to buy another asset, or just get rid of their headache. They're not going to agree to a delay just because the buyer wants to call a temporary timeout. So it needs to be a COVID triggered event, not somebody's wish to delay by 15, 30, 60, 90 days a transaction. The other thing to keep in mind there, the seller in an investment property that is collecting rents, and whether that's a single family home, a fourplex, small apartment building, big apartment building, whatever it is, they have their financial reporting that they need to make to the buyer. So if a seller had 4 units and 3 of the 4 aren't paying on time, I think a seller's got an obligation to disclose that, because right now there's eviction. I think a seller's got an obligation to disclose that because right now there's eviction. Yeah, there's eviction restrictions that are in place. Now, I don't believe that those necessarily cover somebody who's at the end of lease term and either the tenant or the landlord has provided notice to, you got to be out of here by the 30th. But I'm not an attorney and I can't give you legal advice on that. So that's one of those cases where your parties should seek legal counsel. Sellers. Right now, unlike a normal market, our sellers want maximum showings, maximum exposure. Right now, sellers of owner-occupied properties, right, they want minimal showings. I only want buyers, real buyers that are interested in a 4-bedroom, 3-bath, 3-car garage in this neighborhood to look at the house. So keeping in mind that sellers want minimal showings, this is where our use of technology and photography and videography are really important to help sellers with that goal. Obviously, sellers don't like strangers walking in, touching stuff, and in a normal market, let alone this market where there's worry of infection. So we have to work with our sellers and understand their mindset's a little bit different than what it's been. Sellers don't want any open houses right now, and probably for the most part, we don't want to do open houses, even with the state safe distancing that some of you have practiced. Sellers only want serious buyers. Now, I'm going to give you some caution here. This can be an issue, and it can be an issue as it revolves around fair housing and access to property. So a seller saying, hey, is there anything you can do to make sure that every buyer is really a buyer? Well, I'm going to guess for 99.9% of the people out there that might be looking at homes right now, they're looking to buy a house. There's 1 out of 1,000 that's a crazy buyer that says, I'm tired of being at home by myself. I think I'll go out and look at houses. I think I'll call an agent and see if we can do that. So, Mr. Seller, it would seem to be, it would be okay for me to ask the buyer's agent, hey, has the buyer seen this house online? Have they looked at the 40 pictures? Did they look at the virtual tour? Did they see the walkthrough video I did? Yeah, and the buyer would still like to see the property. Great. Mr. Seller, that's good news. We can't require that the buyer's agent send over a pre-approval letter. Just isn't going to happen. You're not, as a listing agent or a seller, you're not entitled to know what my buyer's name is and what they're qualified for up front. I know it's tempting to take and ask that question, and I know you've probably been asked that question. Hey, can you send over a pre-approval letter? Well, what's the pre-approval letter supposed to say? Gregg's a serious buyer. He can spend $300,000. He's got 20% down, right? So this can be a real issue, and we've already had some concerns about agents or from agents when their buyer's been denied an offer by a seller that accepted it. Seller had multiple offers, decided to choose whatever one they want. And sometimes a buyer or their buyer's agent is questioning, hey, Gregg, did your seller not pick this offer because my buyer's name sounds Russian, Swedish, Norwegian, whatever the heck it might be? So we don't want any pre-screening, and we don't want denying any serious buyers that have made a request. And as a listing agent, just make sure if you're asking one agent any questions, you're asking every agent those same questions. So Gregg, is this buyer serious? Yes. Has he seen our video? Yes. Has he seen the 50 photos? Yes. Has he driven by the house? Yes. Make sure you're asking that of every agent on every listing that you have then. But I still believe it can create issues for you as an agent. Some sellers are willing to wait, right? Some sellers are listing their property and marking it as a TNAS, or it's been on the market and they're saying, in this current marketplace, I do not want any showings. So they've moved it from active to temporarily not available for showings. They've made that formal status change on MLS. And other sellers are like, hey, can we leave it on the market, but really not allow showings? Now, in a normal market, that would never happen, right? The MLS rules say if a property is not available for inspection, it's got to be removed from active to TNAS. In this marketplace, MLS is helping us as agents and sellers by being able to have a property listed as active and under the public remarks, putting in there no showings at this time, or showings start again, April 23rd. So, we've been fortunate to have that working for us. Some sellers are taking advantage of the longer coming soon periods, right? I think as a seller, I think this is going to be over by June 15th. However, I want to get my house on the market. I'll list it as a coming soon. It'll sit out there, and then on June 15th, it'll come out as an active listing. I just want the whole market to know that. So there are some tools that sellers have available to them now that they didn't have before. And make sure you explain those to them. Controlled access. Right now, sellers, they don't want any access. They want minimal access. The only way that you can protect them and their wishes, and to punish those that are going into the property without approval, is to have an electronic lockbox. I don't care where your listing is. I don't care if the agents out in that marketplace don't like electronic lockboxes. You still need to put one on, period. End of story. If it's a lot, you don't need a lockbox, right? But as a seller, you come home sometimes and you go, oh, there was a light left on. Man, did I leave that on, or was somebody here today? Well, it's not very easy to tell when you've got a combination lockbox, but it sure as hell is easy to find out when there's an electronic lockbox. And as a broker of an office with a fair amount of listings, there are more lockbox violations than you would like to think, right? So don't say, well, it never happened on my listing, or it would never happen on my listing. That's not true. We've got one property right now that's in a pending status. The agent has never had a request or an approval to be in the property, formal, through showing time. Now, he had a verbal conversation with our listing agent and said, can I go ahead and show it? And our agent said, yeah, let me get that set up for you. I don't know why he didn't tell him to use showing time. Made the call to the seller. Seller says, yeah, go ahead and let him in. Called him back and said, yep, go through. Gave him the combination, lockbox combination. And now we know there were multiple times that agent and his buyer have been in the property and they've not requested it, let alone been approved for it. So that gentleman's going to have an issue, as should everybody. But the point is, the only way you can protect the sellers is to have an electronic lockbox. So they cost $90. They probably last you 6 years. So that's $15 a year. If you have 2 listings a year that it's on, it costs you $7.50 a listing to protect your sellers. I don't think that's too little to ask for you to spend when you're making thousands of dollars on their transaction. Sellers, as part of the showings to their property, they're going to want limited showing contact. In other words, people touching stuff when they're in their property. So it's important, Mr. Seller, your house is going to be on the market. I know you're home every day, right? And when there are showings, here's some important things so that other agents can minimize contact. Make sure all the doors to every room are open. Make sure all of the lights are on, even the hard to find lights. Do anything, move property so that they don't have to move it when they get in here. They will still have to have some contact, front door, probably patio doors, if there are any garage doors. So making sure that the seller has easy access for those. The other thing is to make sure that on the front door, and I don't know that it's our responsibility to have gloves or booties or wet wipes or anything else, but I'm sure your clients would certainly appreciate that as a listing agent if you had those out or you told them to get those out. And as a buyer's agent, to remember to ask everybody before you show them properties is, Greg, how are you feeling today? You haven't had a cold, a cough, you haven't traveled abroad, whatever it is. And then to make sure that you talk to the buyer and say, hey, look, this is not a time or a place to be bringing kids to showings. So we're going to be looking at 2 houses today or 8 houses today. It's important that you leave the kids at home. Hopefully you've got a trusted babysitter, right? But they cannot come on showings. If they show up at the property with the kids, you say, again, the seller is asking for limited access to this property. It doesn't include your kids. So unless you're going to carry them all the way through here, you're going to have to leave them in the car. One of the couple can stand out at the car while the other one runs through. They can switch places and they can both see the property, but sellers are going to expect that out of you. So you might as well set the table on that. Have a note on the front door laying out those expectations. Seller is expecting that A, you remove your shoes. B, you're not barefoot. C, you've got gloves on, right? D, you have limited contact. E, you don't use my restroom. F, you don't leave any garbage here. So make sure you spell all those out on the note on the front door. Seller challenges, inspection requests. Mr. Seller, we're going to have an inspection done here. The good part is the inspector is going to be here to do his job. Bad news is the buyer is probably not going to be there with them. Sometimes that makes it a little bit more difficult because the inspector's got a job to do, which is to accurately and to the best of his ability report on the condition of the property. And he's doing it for somebody that isn't there with him. So inspectors hopefully will perform a thorough inspection, write a good report, and have a conversation with their buyers. The important thing for sellers right now to realize is I can see more inspections blowing up deals. And I don't mean the inspection itself. I mean that the inspection requests by buyers weren't done to a T, and the buyers are going to cancel out of the transactions. So, Mr. Seller, if we receive an inspection request from the buyer, it's important that if you agree to do all these things, you do them as agreed upon. If the buyer is asking for permits to be pulled, you need to pull permits. If the buyer is asking for licensed electrician, plumber, HVAC guy to perform some stuff, you get a licensed guy. Even though your brother-in-law knows everything about electricity, the buyer specifically requested a licensed guy and a permit. It's important you follow through, because you don't want to find out the day before closing when the buyer does a final walkthrough and says, okay, I need the licensed electrician's report and the permit. And you say, well, we didn't do it because there was a cheaper way to do it. And the buyer says, I ain't closing. In fact, I'm canceling on this deal. I'm not going to close a day late, a month late. I'm not going to let you do the work now that you agreed to do before. So when you're talking to your sellers, make sure they're doing everything that was requested to a T, so that the deal doesn't blow up later. So, Mr. Seller, don't agree to do something that you won't complete, right? If you don't have time, if you don't have the resources to do what the buyer's requesting, then let's negotiate a price reduction. I'm always in favor of a price reduction anyway, rather than the seller who's in a hurry to get out of the house to do the work to my satisfaction. I'd rather have a price reduction. Now, I understand that you can't always do that with an FHA or a VA offer or a minimal down conventional buyer where the buyer goes, you know, I don't have the $1,000 to replace the water softener after the fact, after closing. I need it done before closing. So, Mr. Seller, don't agree to something you won't complete. I prefer price adjustments. We've talked about that. Mr. Seller, complete these things as soon as possible. I know the buyers, right? The buyer wrote the offer today. We accepted it today. The buyer wanted 8 days to do the inspection. They did that timely. The buyer came back with a list of stuff to do. We agreed on it. We've got closing in 42 days. Start that list tomorrow. Get the work done early. Mr. Seller, it'll make the buyer feel better about this transaction. It'll buy some goodwill. It will stop them from canceling if there's a different little blip down the road, if you've done everything that they've requested early. So start the date, call those contractors, pull those permits, get that work done, get it to me as quick as you can so I can pass it on to the other agent, right? Quick email to the other agent. Hey, other agent, here's the completed permits, work orders, photos of the work done on the inspection items that the buyer requested. That'll buy goodwill with the other agent. And again, it'll help you if there's another blip down the road. Remember, the more times I've got an issue with something, the more inclined I am to cancel on it, especially if I've had 1, 2 big things, and then the third one, which is just an anthill, and I go, that's it, that's the last straw, I'm out of here. So it's important that the seller do everything that they've agreed to do and do it quickly and provide that documentation to the other party. Mr. Seller, issue appraisals. Mr. Seller, some of the appraisers are not comfortable going into the properties, and some of the loans are not requiring them to actually physically inspect the property. So the appraiser that's going to come out here and set value for this loan, for this mortgage company and this buyer might not actually be in your property. So we need to make sure that we've got all of the information, again, permits, work orders, anything that the seller's done, recent work to the property, right? Anything that the seller can do to help that appraiser see value, right? Hey, I put on a new deck 3 years ago. It cost me $25,000. Great, let's give a copy of that to the appraiser too, so that he can see value in that. Any other updates that the sellers have done, appliances, right? Mechanicals, remodeling, windows, siding, roofing, any of those things that bring value, make sure you get copies of that to the appraiser and the inspector. Remind them it might be an abbreviated visit if they actually do come into the property. I can't imagine that the appraiser is going to go into a house and lollygag right now. My guess, he's going to get in and get out and get all the information he needs as quickly as he can. So he's not going to have a chance to notice the nice tiling that you had done. So let's get him all that information up front. And communicate these possible issues in the transaction to both the buyer, the other agent, and the seller. I mean, if you're the buyer's agent and you learn that the appraiser did not actually get into the property, make sure everybody in the transaction knows, so that the seller's not expecting, hey, when's that appraiser coming? He's actually already been there, right? Or the other agent that has concerns. And then provide information via email to those appraisers as well. Other seller challenges. We did talk about rental property sales, where a seller has renters currently in the property. And unfortunately, there's a part of the market that right now thinks that because the governor put a stay on evictions means that I don't have to pay my rent, even though I can. I've got the money, right? I know I should, I've got a lease, but I know he can't kick me out right now. So instead, I'm going to use this money to, I don't know, go buy beer or whatever. I heard a case yesterday, somebody got their $1,200 government check and went and spent $800 on liquor at Costco. Now, I wouldn't recommend that. And I'm kind of, as a taxpayer, kind of upset that somebody would find first use for $1,200 worth of free government money, which we'll all pay back, by the way, to go out and buy $800 worth of booze. But and there are people like that right now, some tenants are just not paying rent because they can get away with not paying the rent. So with the sellers got challenges with tenants, rents, evictions. Some tenants at this point as well are saying, look, I don't even want the landlord in here for one of his visits to the property to change the furnace filter. So there are some tenants that, and again, we all have to appreciate the fear that some people have, and they're not even allowing the owner of the property into the property, as well as showing agents. They're refusing, even though the lease might say that the seller can enter the property for business purposes, right? Which includes checking on the property, checking on the furnace, as well as allowing showings for a potential buyer or another renter. They're limiting their access. So my solution in any market is for a tenant to always incentivize the tenant. Hey, Mr. Tenant, keep in mind, I'm trying to sell this property. You have another 8 months to go on your lease. I hope to sell and close on this before that. I'll tell you what I'll do. If you cooperate with showings, if the place is picked up, and if you agree to showings, and not the 15-minute showing notice ones, but 6-hour, 12-hour, 24-hour showings, I'm gonna reward you. If the property sells during the period you're in your tenancy, I'm gonna reward you. I'm gonna double your damage deposit, right? You got a $1,500 damage deposit. I wanna sell the property. I'll give you $1,500 if you can help make this process easy for me and the next potential buyer. I've always found that incentive to be great, because think about it. You're a tenant, you're stuck in a property. I don't care, it's another 2 months and then you're going to move out, or they've kicked you out, or another 8 months or another year on your lease. And the owner comes to you and says, how'd you like to make an extra $1,500 by being cooperative? I think every one of them would grab that money. So I've found incentivizing tenants has always been good in any market. Buyers. Right now, buyers, they're a more controlled market. So Mr. Buyers, the buyers can't have the same expectations today that they had a month or 2 months ago. I mean, in the old days, right, we had control of all of the listings. Buyers couldn't find it. The best thing they could do is either drive by a house and see a sign, or look in the Sunday Help, if you know what a newspaper is, if you remember what a newspaper is, they had ads in there on houses for sale. So that's the best the buyer could have done. Now buyers have access through our website or other brokerages' websites to almost up to the minute listing information. And they don't think it's a big deal to call you right now to say in 33 minutes, I want to see the house at 123 Main Street. And in many cases, we've been able to, in the past, get quick approval on showings because of showing time, right? As a buyer's agent, I log in, request a showing in 30 minutes, seller gets a text message, approves it, and man, in a matter of minutes, I've got approval to get into a property. So Mr. Buyer, we're not going to have that access for the most part. You need to understand that many sellers are working from home, got kids that are in school, working from home, and we're going to need a little bit more notice on showings. The other thing I'm going to ask you, Mr. Buyer, is that we only go through properties, that you're qualified for, right? So yeah, it'd be nice to go out and look at that $500,000 house, and maybe in another market we might, but you're only qualified for 450. So let's stick to properties that we know are of the type and of the range, and what you're qualified for. And you're going to need to understand that I won't be able to get us into these properties on short notices. So you're going to need to give me half a day or maybe even 2 days notice on some of these listings that you want to get into. I'd love to get you into them as quickly as I can, but we don't know what the seller situation is today, let alone tomorrow. Mr. Buyer, you might need to provide more information prior to our showings. And that's where, I see an issue where people are coming in and listing agents are saying seller won't let you in unless they see a pre-approval letter. I really think that's bad advice. And I get it that sometimes our clients, that they came up with that idea, but we need to reaffirm to them that in our listing agreement, we agreed not to discriminate. And by somebody providing you with a pre-approval letter, which probably includes their full legal name, right? And sometimes address, it includes financial information that at this point in time, we're not entitled to receive, right? The fact that my buyer can qualify for $500,000 and is looking at a $400,000 house really isn't any of your damn business, let alone whatever their name might be. So we need to caution buyers against providing this stuff. And man, if somebody's got a problem with that and there's an agent that won't let them in, give me a call or give your broker a call. We'll call the other broker and we'll get the issue resolved. But they should not have to provide all of that information just because somebody wants to make sure they're really, really, really motivated and qualified to look at that house. Buyer's challenges, buyer home visits. Many buyers are going to feel like these visits to properties are rushed, and sometimes it'll be on their end as a buyer. I don't want to be in somebody else's property for a long period of time. I just want to get in and I want to get out. In other cases, where a seller has put a restriction on access to the property or only certain hours, the buyers might be rushed. There might be another buyer in the driveway waiting to come in. So buyers need to probably understand that you guys might be making a decision on an abbreviated visit. Please, that was not of my doing, right? If you wanted to spend 15 minutes there or 30 minutes there, I'm going to try to accommodate that with the seller in their showing, but we should not be rushing people through houses. The other thing we need to keep in mind is, even though we want to practice safe distancing, that we're responsible for the people in the property, right? When I open that door and I let somebody in, whether they're my best friends or somebody I just met off the internet or a phone call or a referral, I'm responsible for them. So it's important before you let them in the door to say, look, here's the deal. We're all going to stick together, safely together, right? Safe space. But we're going to go through this property together, so we both see everything, or we all see everything, and we're all together. And if we get in the door and you guys are feeling this isn't the right property, I get it. If you want to rush through, that's fine with me. So make sure that the buyers are comfortable, because again, they're making a decision. I don't care, from 150 to $1,050,000 on that property, and I don't want you to have liability by having them feel like they were rushed through that property. So more information up front. I think buyers can make better use of their time. Again, you're not showing them 25 homes. You're probably not even showing them 10 homes in this market, I would guess. Have the MLS sheet, any reports, city inspection reports, supplements, disclosures, plat map, tax info, community info up front prior to the visit. So my advice would be sending an email. Dear Gregg, thanks for talking to me on the phone today. I'm going to be setting up these 3 appointments for tomorrow. I've included all of the MLS sheets on the 3 properties, the city inspection reports, supplements. Here's a link to the 50 photo display and the virtual tour. Here's plat, tax information, community information. They're going to probably eliminate some of those properties by looking at some of the disclosures maybe, or making longer trips to certain properties because the disclosure does talk up or down the property. So if you've got that information to them up front, they'll be able to make better use of their time at the property. And then ask and provide any other requested information shortly after the showing. So if the buyer's walking out the door and they said, man, it sure would be nice to know how big that lot is. Hey, I can send you over the plat, or we can pull it up right now while we're online and I can send it to you. Would that be helpful? So get them the information as quickly as possible. And I think you'll see continue to see a short time of viewing to writing an offer. But they'll have more information and better information to be making that decision, which takes away some of the buyer's remorse down the road. I can't tell you how many times a buyer has said to me, I never saw the MLS sheet. And it's like, oh, you didn't know the room sizes? No. You didn't know the specialist? No. You didn't know the roof was 10 years old? Well, somebody told me that, but I never saw it in writing. So make sure that the clients have all that information before the showing, and it'll be better showings for you. Buyer challenge, inspections performed solely by the inspector. Let the buyer know that, hey, Mr. Buyer, in this marketplace, sellers want as few people in the property as possible. Inspectors also have a concern about the number of people attending an inspection. Normally, you've been able to be part of that, whether you wanted to be on the whole 4-hour inspection, or whether you wanted to come in the last half hour, or whether you just wanted to get the report afterwards. Right now, we're probably not going to have much of a choice. So my solution to the inspection issue is to be conferring with the buyer before the PA, during the PA, and after the acceptance of the PA, who's going to be doing the inspection. Hey, let's get on the phone with them right now. I'm going to send them over a copy of the city's truth and housing report, a copy of the seller's disclosure, the previous seller's disclosure, the permits that the sellers have. Let's get the inspector on the phone today and talk to him about his inspection at 1 o'clock tomorrow. Hey, Mr. Buyer, is there anything you want after viewing the seller's disclosure statement, is there anything that you want the inspector to focus on tomorrow? And it might be a concern. Yeah, the seller said he had a leaky roof and with an ice damage. Well, I want him to look at the roof. I want him to look at the attic, the insulation, and see if there's any damage. Or there was water in the southwest corner. Hey, so look at that. Look at the outside of the house. Are gutters on, extensions on? Is the sidewalk leaning in towards the house? Whatever it might be, get on the phone with the buyer, with the inspector prior to the inspection. Start building that relationship and that trust now. And then ask for who's going to get a copy of that report. Remember, the inspection belongs to whoever paid for it. The buyer might not authorize you to get a copy of that inspection report. So in that phone call with the inspector prior to the inspection, have that conversation with the buyer. Hey, buyer, is it okay if John, the inspector, also copies me in on that inspection report? Yeah, that'd be great. So get all of those things taken before the inspection. Inspection issues continued. Set a time to review the inspections with the buyer and the inspector. So the inspection was done at 1 o'clock today. He was anticipated to be at the property till 4. He thought he'd get a report over it to us by 5:30. Set up a time for you and the buyer and the inspector to review the report and to cover any of the buyer's potential requests or issues with the property and discuss any possible solutions. Get that done with the inspector on the phone call. You're building trust in that inspector who the buyer might not have met but had paid $400 to, and to discuss, how big of an issue is that water problem, or what do you think is the solution to the leaky roof, or whatever it is. Carefully craft any buyer request to the seller using the inspector's language and notes. This is not a time for, right? We weren't there at the inspection. The buyer wasn't there at the inspection. The buyer is making this request. Make sure you're using the trusted notes from the inspector about the property. Be specific. What needs to be done? How does it need to be done? When? Permits, qualifications. Make sure you're making that in a specific request to the listing agent and the seller so that they can understand what your request is. And this is, again, is one of those times when I'd say to the buyer, look, would you rather have the seller who's in a hurry to get out of this house do this $3,000 worth of work, or would you rather have a $3,000 price reduction and be able to select your own contractors and your own schedule and your own level of satisfaction that this stuff was done right? And I think most buyers are going to say, yeah, let's drop the price to take care of that. And again, you might not be able to do that FHA, VA, minimum down conventional if there's issues that need to be addressed immediately, but try it as opposed to asking for work to be done. And then as a buyer's agent, don't settle for anything other than what was agreed upon. I can't tell you how many times we've had an inspection report where the buyer has requested, licensed contractors, permits pulled, right? And then you go do your final walkthrough and you find out that no permits were pulled, no licensed contractors were in there, and either the seller who was not qualified, did the work, or the seller had his plumber buddy come and do some electrical work because he knew an electrician once. So don't settle for anything other than what was requested, because that just leads to post-closing issues that sometimes we can't do anything about. I mean, the buyer did the final walkthrough and accepted that property. It's hard to go back now and make the argument, yeah, Mr. Seller, but you didn't do what you said you'd do. So make sure that those things are all being taken care of. Issue, Mr. Buyer, we need to let you know that the appraisers may not be physically inspecting the property, which might cause some appraisal concerns by maybe not hitting the value that you and the seller have selected. Now, I teach a class on who cares what the appraiser says. And obviously in an FHA or VA, there is an out for those buyers if the property doesn't hit the sales price doesn't match the appraised value. But let the buyer know that, you know, in a perfect world, appraisers aren't perfect when they get into properties, let alone the world we're operating in right now where they might have been rushed through the property or not even physically inspected the property. So we're going to provide that appraiser with comps, the seller's list of improvements, permits, whatever. You might need to work with the listing agent to get some of this, but get as much as you can because it'll make the appraiser's job easier when he's got to push a number that he might not have been able to get to without that information. I've seen appraisers say, man, if I didn't get that information, I think I would have missed that number by $10,000. Now that's not significant necessarily on a $1 million house, but it is significant on a $200,000 house or a $300,000 house because it's 3% low. So we're trying to make their job, but coaching the buyer as to what some of these issues are so that if an appraisal comes back and it didn't hit value, the buyer goes, oh yeah, well, I can't blame the guy, right? What can we do to solve the problem? The final walkthrough. Buyer ideally wants an empty house, right? Whenever a buyer goes and does their final walkthrough, the buyer ideally would like the house stripped of everything that's not supposed to be there. But keep in mind, the seller has a right to occupy the property up to closing and maybe beyond, depending on what you've put into the purchase agreement. So keep in mind when you're doing that final walkthrough, the seller might still be living in the house, sleeping in the house, and things might not be out. Prepare the buyer for that ahead of time so that they don't have unreasonable expectations. I can't tell you how many times I've gotten a call from another agent that says, we're here to do the final walkthrough. Yeah. And we're closing tomorrow at 3. Yeah. And the house isn't empty. I go, what do you have in the purchase agreement? Does it say the seller is supposed to be out 2 days before closing? No. Well, then they're not going to be. So make sure you're setting your buyer's expectations up for that, as well as the other agent. You know, if you're the listing agent, hey, Mr. Buyer's agent, see that you guys are scheduled to do the walkthrough the day before closing. Just to let you know, the seller's moving truck's not coming till the day of closing. So make sure everybody's prepared for that so there's no surprise. If you're the buyer's agent, talk to the listing agent ahead of time to find out the seller's plans on timing. 30 days in advance. Hey, Greg, do you know when your sellers are planning to be out of the property? We're closing on the 30th. Nope, no idea. Hey, can you check for me? Sure. Oh, it sounds like they got movers lined up for the 30th. They're moving into they're closing on 2 properties that day and they'll be moving into their other house, right? Check again 15 days in advance. Hey, did anything change? It sounds like the movers are coming on the 30th. Nope, that's still the story. 5 days in advance. Hey, or is the seller's moving truck still coming on the 30th? No, no, they got them coming on the 29th now. Great. Confirm everything in an email in writing. One of the solutions is in your purchase agreements, stop writing possession immediately after closing unless the house is vacant. You guys create problems for buyers and sellers and their unreasonable expectations. When the purchase agreement says immediately after closing, none of us would move out of our house probably prior to closing in this marketplace, let alone have everything moved out only to find out the buyer's financing didn't go together. Now you got to move everything back in. So start writing. I don't care if you write possession shall be 6 p.m. the day of closing, 8 p.m. the day of closing, noon the day after closing, whatever it is. Let's not create issues for buyers and sellers in this marketplace. And again, they are looking for a reason sometimes to blow up the deal. And the fact that, possession says immediately and the seller's not going to be out till 1 minute after, immediately after closing, buyers will go off the deep end. And on your buy side, keep reminding the buyer to have some flexibility here. Hey, we're closing on the 25th. You guys are in your apartment till the 30th. That means you got 5 days to move in. Would you guys be upset if we found out the seller couldn't get out until 8 o'clock on the day of closing? Buyers are probably going to say, no, we weren't planning on moving in on the 25th anyway. We're going to wait until the 29th, which was a Saturday. Great. So keep in mind, selling flexibility in everybody's mind right now will help keep deals together. Closing challenges. Right now, in our marketplace, normally what we saw forever was one closing time, two closers, buyers, sellers, agents, loan officers, whoever wanted to come to the closing. And now we're seeing multiple closing appointments, right? Sellers are pre-signing. Sometimes the sellers have two separate pre-signing appointments, right? And then we've got the seller's closer who has their documentation needing to meet up with the listing or the buyer's closer who's handling the mortgage side of the documents. Sometimes we're using messengers to get things in multiple locations. Keep in mind that we need to let people know what's going on and what the expectations are. So yes, Mr. Seller, so you are signing at 10 o'clock in the morning. Our closing is not set until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, which means if everything goes okay on the buyer's end, we won't be getting checks, et cetera, till 2:30, because I'm not going to be at the closing. You're not going to be at the closing. We got to wait for the messenger, or I'm going to pick it up, or you can pick it up, or whatever. So we got to make sure all those arrangements are taken care of. Keys and openers. Remember, as a buyer's agent, the buyer doesn't get those keys and openers from you until there's been a closing, right? Sometimes the listing agent says, hey, Greg, go ahead, open the lockbox, take the key out, and after your buyer's closed, go ahead and give them the key. You're the guardian of that key right now. The buyer is not entitled to that key until closing, unless a purchase agreement and a written agreement with the seller says something else. So don't ever flip the keys to the buyer and say, here's, I'll give them to you now so I don't forget to give them to you tomorrow at the closing, right? So keep any keys and openers in your possession as a listing agent until you either give them to your closer to deliver at closing, or the other agent with clear instructions that the keys are not to be provided to the buyer until funds have the property is funded and the deed has been filed, or not filed, but copies of documents are done. Make sure you're getting copies of your closing documents to the office as well as your clients. Again, if they're not attending closings, somebody's got to get them to them. You might as well be volunteering to make sure they get that done. And then commission checks, making sure that they get turned into the office, whatever your process in your office is, whether it's to drop them at the office, send them to your MCA, so that we can promptly pay you and close out those transactions. Questions and answers. We've got a couple of questions that came in yesterday. I'll read what the question is and we'll just address it quickly, and then we'll go to questions from anybody that's tuned in. So this is a question. One thing that has been in my mind as we're coming out of winter is, what is the best way to deal with possible AC issues, air conditioning, since we haven't had the best weather to test them? If we can test the AC before closing, but outside the inspection period, what's the best way to write this up? Well, if it's a purchase agreement, the seller has an obligation first in a seller's disclosure statement, if they use one, to disclose their knowledge of the working condition of each of the components of the house, appliances, heating, air conditioning, and anything else. And until we get into a warmer market where you can properly test the air conditioning, this is not an issue necessarily in this market, but every market. The buyer's going to have to have the inspector do the best job he can, whether it be in the middle of winter or early spring or late fall, in analyzing and reviewing the condition of that air conditioner. But there is no guarantee until they turn it on. And remember, once we close, it's now your air conditioner, no longer mine. And if it doesn't work 3 weeks from now, doesn't mean it wasn't working properly today. So there's nothing we can really do. Warranty. But as a seller, I wouldn't necessarily warrant an air conditioner for any buyer beyond the date of closing, because if we were to close today and it doesn't get warm enough in Minnesota for you to turn the air conditioner on until June 3rd, I certainly don't want to give you 3 months worth of guarantee that air conditioner is going to work. So, we've got warranties that are, parties can provide for that if there's a concern about air conditioning. Next question. So I have a transaction where the buyer is temporarily laid off. And in this market, you'll notice that a lot of people have been furloughed or immediately laid off, and then they're able to apply for unemployment benefits immediately as opposed to a waiting period. And so some people have been temporarily laid off. The boss has basically said, look, I can't afford you. We're not doing any business. I'd love to hire you. I'd love to you to come back when this is all over, your same 40 hours a week, your same level of pay or whatever it might be. But for right now, I can't pay you. And that buyer is going to have an income loss. And I think lenders are going to be able to work with some of these people. Look, if you've got good credit scores, your credit's not going to be affected. The only thing that's happening is your level of income, amount of income, or income period is going to be limited to unemployment. That when these buyers go back and become gainfully employed and their employer will verify a full paycheck, it won't be an issue. But if you're in the middle of a transaction and this rears its ugly head, obviously you need to let the other party know immediately that, hey, a glitch came up, buyer lost her job, temporarily laid off. It should be, the governor's now lifted the stay. If that's the case, in 2 weeks, she'll be back to work. Will your seller be willing to wait around, hold on to this purchase agreement? I think many sellers would say, yeah, I'd rather, work with this buyer. We've been through the inspection process, seemed like a nice buyer. They, delivered earnest money on time. I'm happy with the price. If I close a month later, that's okay. So, a lot of this is going to be lender driven, right? As much as we think the buyer should get the loan, the lender's the one that has to sign off. So having great conversations with lenders. Which brings up one thing right now. We've had a number of cases where the buyer's financing right now is running into some roadblocks. Either lenders are choosing not to fund the loans for which buyers have been approved, or they've now told buyers, hey, your credit score doesn't qualify you anymore. We're going to have to wait for 60 days, or, we can't give you the loan. There are plenty of other lenders out there that have not changed their guidelines or only minimally tweak their guidelines. So if you're running into cases where a lender is, the buyer's lender has pulled back, try reaching out to some of our trusted partners in the business and see if we can't get the buyer to consider another lender. And that's one of those things that you can kind of get a feel for up front as well. Sometimes the buyer picks the lender, right, off the internet, or guy's brother's cousin's sister from church, whatever it might be. This is one of those where we need to ride that all the way through this transaction. So that's a problem I think we can get through on many of them, but there might be a waiting period. Another issue. The inspector tried to schedule the inspection, and the sellers are both working from home and couldn't leave as the inspector did not want more than one person to attend. It was a scheduling conflict that was resolved. Yeah, I mean, right now, again, we talked about this earlier, inspectors wanting to do their inspection and ideally having nobody there. And some sellers are like, well, man, I've punched the clock, and the only difference is I'm punching it from home right now. My boss knows when I'm working and when I'm not. And I certainly, unless I want to take a vacation day, which I do not want to do, to let an inspector in here, what are we going to do? Hopefully with the longer days now, it's staying light till 7:30 or so at night. Hopefully inspectors are going to have a little bit more flexibility in that. And that's one of the things you can ask for. I mean, if I'm working with the buyer and it looks like there might be an issue on the seller end, which, by the way, I can understand, and I get the kids home, right? We're supposed to be doing schoolwork. I'm supposed to be working on the computer, and some guy wants to come spend 4 hours here. Hopefully we can, with good inspectors, we can get them to tweak their schedule and help cooperate to get that deal done, or on a weekend or whatever it might be. Biggest question I have is the listing coming up where one of the owners is medically at risk and they're concerned with showings. I'm not sure how to get around not having showings. Property is worth $640, and buyers are going to need to see it. So I think this is one of those where maybe the seller rather than having the house available 7 days a week as an active listing on MLS, that they instead choose to, and I don't care if it's one day midweek and one day on the weekend, arrange to have showings. In other words, in the agent and buyer remarks and on showing time, have it blocked off so that Wednesday from noon till 8 o'clock at night and all day Saturday is available for showings, to get people in there if she doesn't think that this is going to be one of those that somebody will buy sight unseen. But I can understand that the seller's at-risk status and wanting to limit stuff. But hopefully we're getting to the point where the weather's going to be a little bit better. The sellers will be able to leave windows open, right, and clear up some of that air circulation issue and transmittal issue of the disease. So that's something you're going to have to work with each individual seller and the buyer's agents on that one. I'm hearing. We got another one here. We talked about this one with renters already, so we'll skip that. I'm working with a seller who has asked 3 times now if listing his home in this COVID environment is a good idea. Seller is concerned that after he invests money to get his home ready to list, ordering CSE docs, ordering Truth in Housing, which all cost money, he wants to know, will his home sell? Well, a couple of things. Truth in Housing reports, depending on the city, if they've got any code compliance, those reports are generally good for anywhere from 1 to 2 years for the same seller. So I could go out and pull a Truth in Housing report or do a code compliance in some cities, and that report's going to be good for the next year or 2 years. So, we're all hoping and praying that this, the stay gets lifted here in the next couple of weeks, and we'll be back to business as normal or semi-normal or abnormal. But the only concern there is association documents. He should check with his association. The seller buys the association documents, and then they buy the financials generally. And those financials can only be 90 days old at the time of the PA, that the forms are presented to the buyer. So they might want to ask their association, hey, if I buy these now, is there a free update down the road, as opposed to having to or reorder them or pay another fee. So seller needs to really make his own judgment on whether or not it's a good time. All you can do is talk to him about buyer activity in his price range and his area, low interest rates, and are you comfortable having people coming through your property now? We shouldn't be talking somebody into something at this point in time. We should be providing them information and referring them to outside. What does your doctor think, right? What's your risk that your doctor has assessed you with? So referring those people outside of us rather than talking them into something like that. That's the last pre-written questions anybody had. Does anybody have any other questions that they'd like addressed?
Hey, Greg, we have a question in Marshall.
A question in Marshall. I'll have an answer for Marshall. What's up?
Okay, so as we're being creative and trying to figure out.
You broke up there.
Be a little edgy.
Oh, you're breaking up, Janet. You're breaking up there. So I got you up till creative.
Okay, and our internet's been a little bit weak lately, but we have a buyer and a seller who have agreed to write an agreement, but the seller is able to buy the house. Do you allow or suggest that we use a terminology that I found that says subject to home of choice, which means the buyer and the seller would basically fully executed agreement, but it is contingent upon the seller finding their next home?
Okay, so first we'll send you 3 cups of internet, so you guys will be up to snuff on that. Everybody send them 3 cups. We got extra internet up here. So your question was, you've got a buyer and a seller, so a dual agency, where the buyer and the seller have agreed to a purchase agreement and its terms, but the seller wants to make the offer contingent on finding the home of their dream or negotiating on that, correct?
Everything is correct, except it's not dual agent. Okay. It's our buyer and somebody else's seller.
So your buyer is, the seller wants to throw a contingency in there for them to find a home. My only suggestions there, and this would be the same whether we're on the listing side or the buy side, would be that, you write up an agreement that says this purchase agreement is contingent upon the sellers, John and Susie Smith, finding and negotiating a purchase agreement on a home of their choice and getting through any inspection contingencies by May 15th, 30 days. I normally like putting a date in there because then there's no dispute. There's a dispute when somebody says 30 days and we say 30 days from when? When we signed the PA, when we started writing a PA, right? Whatever it might be. So I like putting a date certain in there. The other thing I would do is I assume the seller in this case wants their buyer in this case to do an inspection and to get that out of the way, so that the seller then becomes truly non-contingent on a sale of their home when they go write a PA on their new chosen property. So I would put in there that the seller agrees to reimburse the buyer for any inspections, tests, or appraisals if the seller is not successful in finding a home by May 15th. So that the seller's going to want the buyer to, if they ask for 8 days to do an inspection, then damn it, I want the buyer to do an inspection right now. And I want to negotiate that out right now. If I'm the seller, I want to find out, Mr. Bot, if I'm the seller, I want the buyer to do their inspection, right? I want to go through that negotiations if need be, so that I know what my exact net is, right? And what I've got to spend on the other end, because I want to write a truly non-contingent purchase agreement on my new house. I want to check box 2, which says Gregg's house is sold with no contingencies other than the buyer's financing, to get that out of the way. So if I, as a seller, have a benefit of, I got a buyer signing a PA on my house, worst possible case for me is I'm going to have to reimburse them $400 for an inspection. And, if we get too, if I'm asking too far down the line, 30, 45 days to find a house of my dreams, that I might have to pay for an appraisal or in a radon test. So I think the sellers are, there's no reason a buyer would write an offer with a seller contingency like that and then pay for an appraisal, an inspection, and a radon, and then find out the seller goes, yeah, I couldn't find the perfect house, so I want to cancel. So I think that's the best way to cover it, and I'd recommend that whether we were the listing agent or the buyer's agent.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and I guess I would probably, has the seller been out looking at homes? Are there enough properties in that price range to pick from? Are they a picky seller? I'd rather give somebody 2 weeks and then extend it another 2 weeks than to give them 30 days. I want that seller to have their feet to the fire to get out and look at properties and try to negotiate something versus just giving them a blank 30 days. Because what I found is, once you get beyond 2 weeks, the sellers start going, well, we're never going to find the perfect home. And the sellers start giving up, and they got another, 14 days to go yet. So I'd rather hold their feet to the fire. And I talk to the buyer, I'd probably say, look, they want 30 days. Let's try to get the 2 weeks. Well, maybe we'll give them 20 days, and then we'll extend it if we need to. Because the goal here is, right, to put together everybody's transactions and not have a deal blow up. But I don't want to give them too much rope on that kind of deal.
Yep. And they'd already actually found a house and then it fell through. So that's why this came up. That the buyer doesn't want to lose the house and the seller doesn't want to lose the buyer. We just need to find a new house for the seller. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Hey, Greg, it's Erin.
Yes, Erin.
I've got a question for you about the COVID Addendum amendment, and you covered this in your class about it, but I don't remember your answer, so I apologize. In the line 34, where you need to check whether earnest money has to be refunded to the buyer or forfeited to the seller, yes. We're finding pushback or concern on that depending on who we're representing. Because if, like, I'm writing a PA right now where we're representing the buyer, and of course we'd love that money refunded to the buyer. But we also understand that depending on where in the transaction this could happen, the right thing to do might be for that money to be forfeited to the seller. Or, it could vary depending on where you're at in the transaction, who you're representing. So we feel really locked in having to choose one or the other. What do you
Okay.
recommend?
Now there is a line below that says other. Personally,
Nope.
I don't like the way that this is written because, I can give you 20 cases where look, normally, if the buyer doesn't get financed, if a couple of things, if the inspection goes bad and the buyer cancels, they always get their earnest money back, right? If it's a FHA or a VA and the house has to appraise for sales price and it doesn't, the buyer gets the earnest money back, right? If the
Right.
seller can't give clear title, we cancel and the buyer gets the earnest money back. So there's going to be a number of cases where the buyer automatically should always get the earnest money back, right?
Right.
And now we're asking for this, let's call this a timeout addendum amendment, because that's what this is, right? It's
Yep.
everybody agreeing that push comes to shove, something happens that that qualifies, we're in a timeout period, and all of a sudden we're being asked to say, okay, if we go into the timeout and then the timeout is over and either one or both parties want to cancel and not keep it together, who's going to get the earnest money? And I don't like this clause in here. It should almost be a separate clause, and it should say, refunded to buyer, forfeited to seller, and the other option, which should say refer to the terms of the original purchase agreement, right? Just because we have a COVID-related delay, right? Let's just say the seller says, I'm infected, I can't do anything for 15 days, but the buyer's done their inspection and negotiated it. The buyer's had the appraisal done and negotiate, and that issue's been resolved. And the title work is clear, right? And the buyer provided a written statement, right? And the seller's done all of the work on the FHA or the inspection reports, right? So at this point in time, nobody's defaulted on anything,
Right.
but we have a 30-day timeout, right? Or a 15-day timeout. And now we're back off the timeout period. The buyer says, I'm anxious to move forward and make this my house. And the seller looks and goes, wow, I've got $10,000 worth of earnest money. I agree, the buyer's not in default. We're just out of this COVID time frame. I don't want to extend it. And this buyer agreed up front to forfeit any earnest money to me. So I'm just going to not extend the extension, all right, the timeout period. I'm going to declare the PA canceled. I'm going to keep the $10,000 worth of earnest money. And then I'm going to ask the buyer if he wants to buy my house again. Or if I can go out and sell it to somebody else, and again, because there were 3 other buyers at the same price. So I do not like this in there. I could see somebody checking the other box and say, refer back to the original purchase agreement terms. Right?
Okay.
Because if the seller defaulted and didn't do something they were supposed to, and the COVID comes and goes, and the seller says, I'm not extending, right? We're supposed to close tomorrow, but we can't. I'm not extending. And the seller might have a windfall that they would, in any other market, they would not be entitled to. But so I am okay with you guys checking this box that says other, and then writing in refer to original terms of the purchase agreement. And I would say, I'd like this to read differently. If the seller declares this purchase agreement canceled, they won't extend it, right? Then the earnest money goes to buyer or seller. If the buyer refuses to extend it, right? Because I got to imagine if COVID causes a delay for one or both parties in getting this deal done, one party's probably going to want to say, let's keep pushing forward. And another party might go, I've got a financial advantage by saying no.
Right.
Right. If I'm the buyer and I get my earnest money back, I could go to the seller. Hey, look, let's cancel his PA, get my earnest money back. And then I'm going to take another run at you because I think the market has softened a little bit. So I'll send you another offer for $10,000 less tomorrow. So I don't like the way it's written. It was written the best it could under the circumstances. I think if this is going to be around another 60, 90, 120 days, that there might be some suggestions to tweak this form.
Okay,
But
thanks.
good question. Yeah. And that was a question from Maple Grove. Any questions from anywhere else on the globe? The 4 corners of the globe, which means the earth is flat. I am hearing none. You sure? This is your chance.
Greg, you're so good. None of us have any questions.
Oh, you're such good listeners then.
Thank you.
I must have made it clear, not confused anybody today for a change. Okay, and again, mail the $2,000 check. Make it out to Gregg Hartos, Educational Resources. What, Kim? I'm not kidding. Anyway, I thank you all for being here. Please let me know if you have any questions. And again, you know, we're going to see stuff that we didn't anticipate or things that are going to make us scratch our head and go, what do we do now? I mean, reach out for help. I mean, our goal, you know, I don't like deals falling apart. And I think for the most part, we can prevent them with the exception of a crazy buyer and a crazy seller who have just, you know, figured out that they're not going to close. But you guys probably have inkling before that. So let's brainstorm ways to either get the buyer to rebuy in, reconfirm their decision, because there's going to be plenty of people out there now telling them you're crazy to be moving, you're crazy to be, you know, they don't know that interest rates are at an all-time low, that it was time for me and my family to move based upon our needs, whether we're buying or selling. So, you know, we need to reinforce what their decisions were. We might need to walk back the conversations. Hey, the first time we met last November and you guys started talking to me about buying a new home because you wanted to start having a family. Did any of that change? Right? Or needing a bigger house or a smaller house or whatever it might be. So, you know, we want to help them make good decisions. And sometimes we need to remind them of why they made those decisions. So let me know if you have any questions, but thanks for tuning in.